Hi, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Thank you all so much for joining our webinar today, where we are super excited to take a first look into the new launch of the Missouri market. So over the course of the next half hour, 45 minutes or so, first I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of some really exciting developments within the Missouri market and information that one needs to know. And then I'll be joined by Jessica Lucas and a series of panelists to have a great discussion about what's going on in this industry. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kelly Nielsen. I head up Client Insights here at BDSA. So with that, let's dive on in. So I want to first start by giving a really quick overview of who is BDSA and the type of information we provide. And this is really important because as we're going through and providing some insight into what's going on in the Missouri market, you're going to see a wide range of different types of information. And so I want to provide some context here. Our goal here at BDSA is to provide an overall total view of the legal cannabinoid industry, both today and tomorrow. And so as we're going through this, you're going to see a wide range of different types of information. First is retail sales tracking. So retail sales tracking, we partner with dispensaries in now 12 different markets where we gather information on what is selling at the transaction level, what products, what price points, what categories. And we're able to aggregate all of that data and project out the type of, project out what that means for the total marketplace. And so our goal with retail sales tracking is to help you understand all the different brands, products, price points, product attributes that are selling through dispensaries. And so you're going to see some of that information here today. We're really excited because Missouri is the newest state that we are tracking with retail sales tracking. This past month, we launched retail sales tracking at the overall category level, and coming soon this next month or in our next publishing cycle, we will actually get down to the brand and product level. So super exciting stuff. We also provide perspective on where the market is headed with our market forecasts. So our goal is with market forecasts is to aggregate all the information we have about what's going on in the marketplace, things like what's selling through retail sales tracking, patient count, regulatory framework, and also make projections about the future. When are states going to make the transition into medical markets or adult use? And we aggregate all of this information in order to provide a view of what is going to happen in the cannabis market going forward all the way through 2026. And for these market forecasts, we actually provide perspective at in the United States at the total state by category level, but we also have by province by category level in Canada and market forecast information in 30 different countries. So a lot of really interesting information there on the outlook of the cannabis industry. And then finally, when I think about retail sales tracking and market forecast, that's all about the what. What's selling? Where is it expected to go? What do the numbers look like? But we also conduct consumer surveys, and that's consumer insights. This is our ability to reach out to the overall population to understand how consumer perceptions toward the cannabis industry continue to evolve. And so we're understanding things like what is the penetration of consumers, or what is the likelihood of converting non-users today into consumers in the future? For consumers, what types of products are they purchasing? What are their motivations? How do the different consumer groups segment out, for example? And so that's really providing perspective on why we're seeing what we're seeing from the retail sales tracking and market forecasting lens. And so as we're going through this, we're going to share some really exciting information from all three of these as it pertains to the Missouri market. But I do want to start a little broader. Let's first start by just providing some lay of the land, what things are looking like in the overall industry. And so what you are seeing on this page is the growth that we've observed in cannabis from 2020 to 2021. And you can see that at the global level, we are observing that that the overall growth in cannabis from 2020 to 2021 is very substantial. So about a 41% increase from 2020 to 2021. And that's being driven very heavily by the US market. we'll talk a little bit about the total US market here in a second, but this is really being driven by things like the large emergence of big medical markets, the evolution of more states coming online, et cetera. So a lot of development as we've come from 2020 into 2021. And from here, where do we expect to go into the future? So this year, 2021, we expect the total cannabis market in the United States to reach about $24.9 billion. And as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, that is very heavily driven by the adult use market, about $14.8 billion, but also about $10.1 billion contributing from medical markets. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, when we think about where this growth from 2020 to 2021 is coming from, the emergence of large medical markets have contributed to this. So the likes of Pennsylvania, Florida, Oklahoma, and Missouri, which so far to date is exceeding overall expectations. As we look to the next several years, we expect the overall US cannabis market to reach about $47.6 billion by 2026. And with that, we expect much of that growth to be driven by the adult use, but we still expect that the medical market is going to make up roughly a little, just under a quarter of that overall volume. As we think about where this growth is coming from and what some of these states are looking at, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here, some of those biggest markets that we expect to be playing in the space. California, the number one market in the entire world from a cannabis perspective. We expect that to continue to sustain, but we do expect more states, those that are not currently legal or are currently in the process of rolling out programs, to continue to develop as well. And so I wanted to just provide this context to provide a little bit of a broader understanding of what's going on in the total global and US cannabis market before we dive specifically into the Missouri market. Again, super excited. Missouri just launched with retail sales tracking. So let's first provide some perspective on what's going on in this program. And so if you take away nothing else today, I would say take away a couple of things here of what's going on with the overall cannabis program in Missouri. First to call out is the timing. So to make sure that we're all level set in terms of what's gone on in this industry, the medical market in Missouri launched in October of last year, so October 2020. So it's about 1 year into its overall development. And the first is, the way that this state legalized, they legalized through amendment in 2018. So it took about 2 years to get product into the hands of consumers, which just for perspective is actually pretty quick, starting from scratch and moving into a medical program. So it's among the top 5 in terms of speed and its ability to go from legalization with no existing framework to getting product in the hands of consumers. So that's super exciting into itself. But we've seen very rapid growth in this particular space. And so we'll talk about numbers here in a few minutes, but just to provide some context, the month of September saw $23 million in medical sales in cannabis in Missouri. And that overall growth is being driven by a couple things. And the first is the rapid growth of overall patient count. And so as of right now, the estimated penetration of the adult population of patients is about 3.3%. For reference, that is higher than most cannabis medical markets currently available, and it's more than double last year. So the way that the framework has been set up, it's allowing medical patients to have access to cannabis fairly easily. Part of that is driven by the fact that there is a broad qualifying conditions that folks are able to get their medical card with this program. So that includes things like chronic pain and PTSD. And because of this, having the consumer base and that increase in patients month over month, so many patients continue to join the program every month, combined with overall permissive regulation. So overall, there's compared to other medical markets, there's generally speaking low fees to enter the space, high overall purchase limits for consumers. So consumers have the opportunity to purchase in large quantities, and overall few restrictions in terms of the product format types. And so as we go through this, we'll talk a little bit about where volume is coming from a contribution to volume of different categories. And you'll see that is actually starting to look more like a pretty established state. And that is because we're seeing that there's few product restrictions in what cultivators and manufacturers are able to provide. And then finally, availability. So for perspective, as of today, and I literally looked this up on health.mo.gov this morning, but as of right now, there are 172 licensed medical marijuana dispensaries that have been approved to operate. And the state did say that that can go up to 192 overall dispensaries. This is really interesting, and I want to spend a minute talking about this because when it comes to the overall number of dispensaries versus the population, this is a very high availability for consumers. So just to juxtapose this against a couple other medical markets, for example, let's talk about Florida, for example. So Florida is currently today one of the largest medical markets in the world, and they have 372 open dispensaries as of the latest week. To put that into context, that's about a little over 2 times as many dispensaries compared to Missouri, but they have about 4 times the population. And so you would expect Florida to have more dispensaries, but the dispensary per person or per population substantially higher in Missouri. Also compare that to something like Illinois, which still only has about 55 medical dispensaries. It's the neighbor next door, or somewhere like Arizona, which at the time of adult use legalization, so when it was only a medical market, had about 120 dispensaries in the overall state. And that turned into a $1 billion medical market. So really exciting to see the level of availability of cannabis products to consumers in Missouri. I also want to call out the second half of this, which is those dispensaries licenses have been, they are among about 130 different entities. That in itself is also really impressive because if we think about a state like Illinois, really heavily dominated by multi-state operators, or Florida, of those 372 dispensaries, they are owned by about 15 operators. And so the takeaway here, Missouri, a lot of dispensaries providing a lot of availability to consumers or their patients. And it's a very robust market for a wide range of different entities to hop into. So super exciting there. But it all starts with the consumer. And so let's talk about the consumer for a second. So I mentioned earlier that we conduct surveys to understand the overall perception of cannabis over time. And so what you're looking at here, we observed that about 3/4 of the Missouri population are bought into the idea of consuming cannabis. And what we see is that about 25% of the adult population claims to be a past 6-month consumer of cannabis. But you have a really high population, about 48% of the population, who says they are not currently a consumer, but they are open to trying in the future. And if we compare that to other medical markets, other established medical markets, on average, we typically see about 35% of consumers and 35% of acceptors. So the implication here is there's only upside potential for where we expect the Missouri market to go. And everything you're looking at on this slide is specifically tailored to the medical market. We actually see the penetration among fully legal markets push up into the mid-40s, so 43, 45%. And so the implication here, today we expect to continue to see more and more increased usage in the medical space. And then in the next couple of years, when adult use eventually could become available, continue to grow further. And so to provide a snapshot on the overall size of the industry today. So what you're looking at here is overall volume, dollar sales to date for the Missouri market. And so you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here, that purple bar, we started tracking retail sales tracking. When we launched this, we've gone back through April. So just to provide some perspective there, really exciting is that we have seen growth every month in the overall space. And so this is average monthly sales, or excuse me, the monthly sales since April that you can see here. And as I mentioned earlier, September maxed out at about $23 million. And so that's super exciting based on where this market started in the early months, January, February, March, less than $6 million a month. So really substantial growth there. Overall volume in Q3, over $65 million. And when we take a look at January through September, about $131 million. So really becoming a key stakeholder in the space here. market does continue to evolve. And so what you're looking at on this slide is the difference in the contribution to dollar share by category in April versus September. And I think a couple key things to call out. The first is that, like many other markets, inhalables, particularly flower, really dominate and are king. So flower represents about half of the overall dollar sales in the overall industry. But where we do see fluctuation is in the contribution to volume, specifically from concentrates. So concentrates, including dabbable concentrates and vapes, made up about 13% of total dollar sales in April and has grown to about 23% of sales this latest quarter, or this latest month in September. And a key here is these types of products were not available in the Missouri market until about the March-April timeframe. So a key here is they have expanded really substantially, but there's probably still some upside. So in most mature markets, we've seen that concentrates make up around 30 to 35% of overall dollar sales. And so we do expect that to continue to increase, potentially at the expense of edibles, which currently makes up about 20% of overall volume as of September. But in most markets, typically makes up around 15% of overall sales. And so I know I've talked a lot about a couple different markets and comparisons, so I wanted to lay out some examples of comparison to a couple other markets here. So on the left-hand side of the screen, I want to call attention specifically to the comparability between the Missouri market and the Maryland market, which is a more established overall medical-only cannabis market. Because at first blush, the two states from a demographic standpoint are roughly similar. Both have roughly about 4.6 million adult consumers, or excuse me, adult population. But we do recognize that they are regulated fairly differently. And because of that, we are starting to see some of these differences. So I mentioned earlier that there is likely upside potential to the penetration of getting more consumers in the door in the Missouri market. And you can see that here in the comparison versus Maryland, where in Maryland, as of spring, we saw that about 35% of the adult use or adults were consumers. So we expect Missouri to continue to expand. And as I mentioned there, when thinking about the category share, Maryland, is one of those markets where we do see that concentrates typically make up about 28% of overall volume. Edibles make up about 12%. So again, we expect Missouri contribution from categories to continue to evolve. I also wanted to spend a minute talking about pricing. So I was poking around, taking a look at the overall pricing in the Missouri market versus others. And I want to call attention specifically to a normalized price for a gram of flower. And what's really interesting here is that one thing when we take a look at states surrounding Missouri, primarily Illinois, is notoriously expensive when it comes to overall cannabis sales. And what we're currently seeing is for a gram of flower, Missouri still on the higher end versus some other states such as Florida or Michigan or even Maryland. And so just putting that on the radar that as of right now, part of this could be driven by the fact that folks are still getting used to purchasing cannabis, where in other states that are more established, they might be buying in bulk or bigger quantities, driving the price per gram down. But I think it's something that we will absolutely want to continue to keep our eye on. Then let's think about the future here. So when we think about the overall outlook, a couple things to call out on this slide. The first is that you'll notice that purple bar is the Missouri medical market, the black bar is the adult use market. And so right now, BDSA is anticipating that adult use sales will be available in Missouri around 2024. So, sometime in the next 3 years or so, we'll expect some legalization, and then it will take some time to get that product in the hands of consumers. But once that happens, we do expect the market to continue to expand, driven by both the medical market and the adult use market, to reach almost $1 billion market by 2026. So about $959 million, split pretty equally at that point across medical and adult use markets. And so as we think about that future, keep an eye on that overall roughly $1 billion number. Keep an eye on that timeline for adult use legalization and availability. And as I mentioned a couple slides ago, keep an eye on that overall contribution to category volume, because we do expect that that's going to begin to normalize and look like some of these other more established states like Maryland as we continue forward. And so with that, I'm actually going to hand this over to Jessica Lucas, our SVP of Commercial, and our wonderful panelists, who we are so thankful to have have with us today to talk about the exciting Missouri market.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Everyone can join me on video. I think everyone's here, hopefully. Awesome.
Actually,
All right, so before we get started asking the tough questions, thank you, Kelly, for the overview. Just for everyone who has dialed in, Kelly gave a very high-level overview of where we're seeing monthly sales down to category level. Just as a quick reminder, we will be rolling out brand and product level data for the Missouri market this month. So more to come from us. We don't want to give it all away at once. So more to come from our team on top brands and performance down to SKU level within the marketplace. In the meantime, a lot of drillability down through stages of categorization. So with that, I'm going to round robin our panelists. So I'll call on you guys, but just a quick introduction. As Kelly mentioned, I lead our commercial team at BDSA. I'm super excited to be talking with some of our best and brightest partners and clients within the Missouri market, get their thoughts, their expertise, their input on kind of everything that's going on. Quick shout out, Andrew, thank you so much for bringing BDSA into Missouri, pushing us that this is a priority market and getting us up and running very quickly. Same for you, Mitch. I know you were an early advocate of kind of pulling this into the marketplace. So with that, I'm going to force a little bit of an icebreaker. So I want you all to tell me your name, your role, company, and if you were a baseball player, what your walk-up song would be. I will start because mine is, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, all I do is win. I have been joking that I wish on Zoom you could have entry music, so every time you dial in, your song plays. So hopefully that comes up. So I'll pass this over to you, Zach. Quick introduction and your walk-up song, and then we'll get started.
Hi, my name is Zach Romey. I'm the founder and owner of Robhots Edibles. We started in Colorado, but I'm born and raised in Missouri, so super excited to be operating in Missouri. And as far as a walk-up song, I think it would be Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix. That opening guitar riff really can't be beat, so that's what I would go with.
Love it. I'm going to go in order. So how about you, Andrew?
Andrew Mullins, Executive Director, MOCANN Trade, also known as Missouri Medical Cannabis Trade Association. I'm a little bit old school, so I would probably say something along the lines of DJ Cool and Fat Man Scoop, Let Me Clear My Throat.
Mitch, you're up.
So my name is Mitch Meyers. I'm a partner with BeLeaf Medical. I actually asked our staff what they thought my song should be, and they said definitely The Bitch Is Back by Elton John.
That's such a good idea to ask the people around you to tell you. That is very telling. Bethany.
Bethanie White, I'm the Director of Marketing over at CLOVR, and my walk-up song would be Warrior's Call by Volbeat, just for the drum solo alone.
And Corey, last but not least, also want to thank you for your service. I am a LinkedIn stalker, and with tomorrow being Veterans Day, just want to give you a quick shout out. I'm very proud of the members of my family who are veterans. And BDSA actually has the day off, kind of to make sure that we pause and thank everyone. So just want to call that out. Sorry to, hopefully I didn't embarrass you, but just wanted to thank you.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. My name is Corey Martin. I'm the Chief of Staff for Kansas City Cannabis, and I spent 20 years in the Army. And so now I get to do something that I really love and get to help people. So it was funny though, I was talking about this walkout song with my kids, and my 16-year-old son said that this is like every middle-aged dad's walkout song. So it has to be AC/DC Thunderstruck, of course. That's also my 10-year-old daughter's favorite song too. So that's what it is for me.
All right, well, thanks again. Let's just go ahead and dive in. So the first question I have, I'm going to shoot this over to Bethanie to get us started. You know, just give us a little background of kind of when did you or the CLOVR organization get started in Missouri? And kind of, I know it's a negative one, but I'm going to throw it out there. What's been the biggest challenge for you, or at least from your perspective, what's been the biggest challenge?
And we got started in Missouri probably 2019. After working in the Colorado space for a little bit with Missouri on the horizon and the majority of our company being in Missouri, it was a no-brainer to focus solely on this state. I'd say the biggest challenge changes every day, and that's either whether it's your regulations, your from a marketing perspective, your labeling, how you're able to promote, with being one of the first to market, constantly having new manufacturers and new products hit the market that you're competing against and trying to stay relative and stay new and fresh. That's another one. So I mean, choose the day, and it's another hurdle.
That's great. And Mitch, I'm going to throw this to you next. I know I believe, at least from our history, you have a CPG beverage alcohol background, kind of got into cannabis in Illinois, now in Missouri, but would love to hear from you kind of timelines, why Missouri, biggest challenge that you faced.
Well, I was involved in Illinois back in 2014, ended up with a dispensary license up in the Chicago market. And shortly after I received that, realized that the state of Missouri was offering 2 licenses for people to cultivate CBD and treat epilepsy patients. So we were fortunate to get one of those licenses in 2015. And so that got us into the state very early with just CBD. But I think what that did for us, as well as a lot of other people in the state, was get them more comfortable with cannabis. And when they saw the benefit that CBD was having with epilepsy patients, everybody calmed down a little bit. So we were actually early into the state, got to meet a lot of the people. I think it helped us. And then obviously went after the licenses in 19 with everybody else.
I'm going to go to the next question. So one thing we talked about, and just a little bit of kind of background, I know I talked to the panelists about this, but when we are processing data in a new market, what our team is focused on building is an exhaustive product catalog. So down through all of the levels of categorization. So for example, ingestibles to edibles, edibles, candy to gummies, gummies to brand to SKU, and SKU to product attributes like THC milligrams, CBD milligrams, flavor, pack counts, pack size, so on. We build an exhaustive product catalog. And what is really fun about that is that, yes, we use computers and all the fun direct API connection into retail point of sale systems, but we have to have humans building that product catalog and making sure we're outlining all the details of those products. So what's really nice for us is we have a team of people at BDSA who I can go to and be like, just based on processing what you're seeing in terms of transactional sales happening at retailers, what's the biggest difference in Missouri than what you've seen in recent markets we released? And the first thing our data management team said was a lot of new and exciting brands, products, and form factors. No offense to anyone on the call, I don't mean this offensively, but it's not an MSO dominated market. And it's fun to hear that and look at the licenses, the license holders, what's happening in the marketplace. And Andrew, you brought up a really interesting point that there is a misperception out there that Missouri is an MSO dominated marketplace. And obviously BDSA releasing brand and product level data will expose the truth in the next few weeks. But would love to hear from you. Why do you think that perception exists? And what is either the benefit or the negative of that being a belief out there in the general public?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of it starts with the assumption that Missouri was operating from the same, amendment of framework as every other state, and then looking at other states that are coming on that, like you guys already mentioned about Florida and I think Illinois, that there's 9 or 10, or I think in Florida 15 operating groups that cover most of the entire state, where we have 130 operating groups. I would attribute the diversity of that in Missouri really to the Article 14 program. I mean, it prescribed the amount of licenses and the way those licenses would be applied for and then won. And it, turns out that, we have 130 operating groups. As it relates to, why so many, specifically brands, some of that may emanate from the fact that we're going to have 89 licensed manufacturing infused products facilities as part of the program here. And, you can do the quick math. Every MIP that develops, their own brand lines and product lines, they might have, multiple brands, multiple SKUs. So we're going to see a whole litany of brands and products coming into this market. And many of those brands and products are emanating from new groups. So these are groups that have not operated in any other state previously. So it's a very broad, very diverse market and industry. And I think that's maybe kind of counter to a lot of the assumptions folks have made, just looking in on Missouri, but not necessarily participating in the state.
Perfect segue for Zach to jump in. With your brand Robhots coming from Colorado and moving into Missouri, what has been kind of the biggest aha, the biggest challenge, the biggest opportunity as you kind of expanded into the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, Bethany kind of touched on the challenges. I mean, the main thing that we've really been running into is the regulations regarding packaging. Because, we'll try and stock up on packaging to get our costs down. And then next thing you know, they change a regulation and now you're covering all that new packaging with a sticker or something along those lines. And we ran into those issues in Colorado. Ultimately, they kind of figured it out, settled on a set of regulations that everybody abides by now. So I think Missouri will get there, but that's definitely been the biggest challenge. As far as opportunity, really, like I said, for us, me and a couple of my business partners, we're born and raised in Kansas City. So it was a great opportunity for us to try and get into the market. We were fortunate to pair up with CLOVR. Bethany and everybody over there has done a great job. And, the facility is 10 minutes from where we all went to high school. So it was a really great opportunity for us. And we jumped on it as quick as we could.
Awesome. And Bethany, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot by asking this, but are you willing to list out the brands that you guys are licensing and bringing into the Missouri market? Oh, you're muted, I think.
Sorry, of course, I don't mind. We have Robhots. We were fortunate enough to work with Wana Keef for your beverages. We recently brought on Mountain High Suckers and then Care by Design. And then we're working with a few others right now on some other form factors that aren't solidified yet, but pretty excited to bring into the market.
Awesome. And I won't ask you what's not working in bringing those licensed brands in, given that might be a little controversial, but what has worked well?
Honestly, not having to recreate the wheel. We partnered with people who are some of the best in the country, what they do. We're not having to spend the man hours, the years, the amount of time and dollars that they put into making the best gummies and the best beverages and lotions. We were able to just take their expertise and give it to Missouri patients right away and know that we're providing them with something that's consistent and has been proving itself for years in other states.
And that's a big deal. I can tell you, we spend a lot of time and money R&Ding product, and it makes you late to the market. And, hindsight obviously is better, but I think that looking at those successful licensed products is a really good way to go.
Perfect. And I'll let Mitch and Corey, I'll address this question to you. So Kelly covered it at a high level in the upfront section, but I want to reiterate, BDSA tracks 12 US legal cannabis markets. And one thing that's really interesting there is Missouri has the largest portion of dollar sales coming from edibles. So more so than any other state we track, at about 20% of dollar sales coming from edibles. Coming from kind of the retail side of things, what are your guys' thoughts of why that is? Is there a unique market dynamic at play? Is this population? Is this demographics of your patients? Or is this about new news and new form factors being available to patients in the Missouri market? Sorry, that's a loaded question. I don't know, Corey or Mitch.
You had a lot of questions inside that one question. No, one of the things that we've talked about here, because we're opening our 4th retail dispensary here in Kansas City here in just a few weeks. And so one of the things that we've talked about here is there is like intense brand loyalty in edibles. So, you know, we might see patients bounce from, you know, one flower cultivator to another, whatever. But when people buy a Wana blueberry indica edible, that's like all they ever buy. They are very loyal when they find what they want. But, you know, one of the biggest things we do is we try to line people up with the medicine they need. And I think that's kind of a testament to how we operate is we're finding patients the right medicine and then they're sticking with it.
I would say from our perspective that the reason why edibles jumped out quickly was due to supply. There just wasn't a lot of flower and trim for sale. And the little that was available, manufacturers could make it go a much longer way. So, you know, I think initially the people who had manufacturing licenses were obviously doing long lead contracts to try to get biomass. But I really think that it was to make the product go further in the state initially. And, you know, let's face it, we have a lot of home growers. So if people were looking for flower, it's potential that they were buying from home growers initially, and then the edibles, you know, had to be gotten at the dispensary level. So I think that's where they were trying initially.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mitch. We have a huge population of home cultivators here in Missouri, and they're all, I mean, they grow amazing things. But it's a different story when you start talking about manufactured products. It's not as easy to do, you know, from the basement, garage, or your shop, wherever you're growing. So, you know, that could be a big part of it too. But one of the things that I really saw early on was, you know, we saw a lot of those edibles. It kind of gave you more bang for your buck because we saw the flower prices are still kind of high per gram. They're starting to come down a little bit more, but you really did get more. I guess you got more THC per gram or whatever. You got more bang for your buck when you would purchase an edible. So I think that had something to do with it too.
Corey, Mitch, do you guys think there was any effect on demographics? Because it seemed like a lot of the dispensaries were surprised at the average age of their patients as the industry took off. It seemed like, you know, slightly older and more choosing of forms that were not smokable.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I watch pretty closely is what's the average demographics of our patients. And it started off, it was kind of the younger 20 to 30-year-old group, but the last 4 or 5 months, it's really bumped up into that 40 to 55-year-old age group. So we're seeing a little bit older, maybe a little bit more responsive, a little bit more educated patients. And then also with the edibles, you know, I do a lot of outreach and I do a lot of community engagement, and a lot of people just say they don't want to smoke. They don't want to smoke or they don't want to vape. And if they can just take a little edible or a microdose mint, they are perfectly fine with doing that.
Right, I agree. It really depends location by location. We have one particular location that I would say over indexes on a veteran population. So I know that our staff was really kind of taken aback in the very beginning when they were seeing the age, and the medical condition of some of the people that came in. So we really pride ourselves on education and being helping people to choose the right form factor for them. And I agree with you, Corey. I think especially some of our older, more medically oriented patients are really looking for things that aren't a smokable product.
Yeah, and kind of that point that you touched on, Corey, about brand loyalty. And I believe, Mitch, you said it too. It's kind of hard to make edibles at your house and really get a consistent dosage if you're making butter or whatnot. So when people do find an edible that's consistent and works every time and they know exactly what that effect's going to be, people really stick with that.
And one question, and I don't know, this might be relevant, Bethany, you could jump in, Andrew, but also Corey being focused on Kansas City and Mitch, your locations being more focused on St. Louis. Any insight or thoughts on regionality within the market? So that is something BDSA will also be rolling out. Sorry, again, don't want to give you guys everything at once, but any thoughts or kind of insight you guys have in terms of regionality, whether it's metro areas in comparison to one another or rural versus metro? And the hot topic we always like to talk about is border towns. So Bethany, you might chime in terms of like selling into retail, but would love to hear also Corey, Mitch, Zach, any thoughts you guys have.
Go ahead, Bethany.
Just from a selling point, it is a lot harder to sell to those border towns, especially Arkansas are the ones that are closest to Oklahoma because of a price point, a pure price point. They're willing to drive an hour or two to save quite a bit on some of their products. So we've seen that a lot with those border town dispensaries.
Yeah.
So we border, sorry, our locations are all in the St. Louis area. And so we border the Metro East in Illinois. And I have spent a lot of time in there trying to pick their brains and figure out, you know, where their customer base is coming from. And they think 40% of their business is, you know, Missouri based. So I can't wait until we have a rec program here and we can bring all those Missouri shoppers back and the Illinois people across the border.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're fortunate that in the Kansas City area, we don't have to compete with Illinois that has a rec market, and you know, most of Southwest Missouri, like you mentioned, those patients, they can just make a little trip over to Oklahoma and they can get a temporary license, and there's a lot cheaper product there. Oklahoma's kind of the Wild West of cannabis markets, but you know, but that's what patients are willing to do. So those dispensaries that are down in Southwest Missouri, you know, are having a hard time keeping the patients in state. One of the things that we've really noticed, because we are kind of around the metro, our Blue Springs location is very suburban. And then our Kearney and Excelsior Springs locations are really more of a rural communities. And we see a lot of differences in as far as like basket size, you know, like the average amount that a patient's purchasing in the rural areas is much smaller. And then concentrates just really don't sell well in rural areas. So, but flower is still king, you know, flower is still around 60% of our sales, no matter where you go. So I think that's probably just because maybe in those rural areas, that's what people are comfortable with.
Yeah, and Andrew, any thoughts on maybe regions of the state that might be underserved or underrepresented in terms of licenses or operating dispensaries?
Well, excitingly, you know, Missouri and our amendment prescribed that dispensaries would be geographically dispersed across the 8 congressional districts. So the 192 dispensaries are divided up 24 per congressional district, which when we've looked at a map and we've kind of, you know, mapped this out, we see that any patient anywhere in Missouri should have to drive no more than 50 miles to access medical cannabis. I think that's you know, really great for access in general. As it relates to regionality, I mean, this is completely anecdotal, and I think we're going to see a lot more coming from BDSA to sort of affirm where some of the insights are. But I don't think it's so much things happening different, you know, Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, whatever. I think it's more like Corey was saying, you know, it's rural versus suburban versus metro urban within those geographies. That's where the dynamics seem to live. I would say we see less, and this again is completely anecdotal, but we see less differentiation between the 3 major markets than we do the communities within those major markets.
All right, I'm going to ask, is this the $1 million question? I'm not sure, but I'm going to throw this at you, Corey, because I think you volunteered to address it first. What is your stance on the adult use legalization probability? That's question number 1. And because you like me having questions within questions, I'm going to throw a few more.
Throw them at me.
Okay. The second one is, what do you not want to see happen to the Missouri market with the probability of adult use? And I'm going to toss that one also at Zach and Mitch, coming from other markets, is what's the risk and where do you see other markets having done it from your perspective incorrectly. So Corey, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so Missouri, there's a couple different groups in Missouri that have started doing some initiative petitions already, and they're out circulating and gaining signatures as we speak. And if those gain the right amount of signatures, which 1,000 over the state and throughout the different congressional districts, if those gain the signatures, then that could very well be on the ballot this next November. And I think it has a great chance of doing that. One of the initiatives has a very good, any of the initiatives do. And then,
Corey, I think we're struggling with some audio issues.
you know, I guess with that, the biggest thing that I would be concerned about, from a patient perspective, that the medical program doesn't get gutted or scrapped or, you know, or shut down.
Somebody else, Zach, do you want to jump in?
You guys
Yeah, I
hear
was
me?
going to say, so that last point Corey just made, so we've always been really medical focused out here. When I started this company, my whole plan was to get as many people as I could off of prescription pills and on the natural cannabis medicine. That was really our biggest thing. And I hear from people all the time that we've achieved that goal, so it's really good. But what happened here when the adult use market really came online, you saw the medical market take a tremendous hit and people really focus on that rec side. And what we've really done is keep focusing on the medical side, really expanding our medical offerings in terms of more flavors, more dosages, totally different options all the way around. So that would be my biggest concern. One is just making sure the medical program doesn't take a hit or suffer if an adult use market comes on. And then I would also say another thing I wouldn't want to see is the Oklahoma model. As you guys said, it's the Wild West. It's crazy out there. We're in Oklahoma as well, and you know, it can be good for consumers because they can go get some really cheap products, but at the same time, everybody can go get a license. So what we've seen out there, so many dispensaries are out there that it's almost impossible to have all those dispensaries sustained because there's just too many of them. And now you see people going out of business and losing a lot of money on their licenses, their startups, all of that. So I would say in combination of not killing the medical program, also not hand out so many licenses to where it's just not overpopulated and it's hard for anybody to really make any money.
Agree.
Mitch?
The one thing that I think is going to be really good about it, and it's kind of the elephant in the room, I feel like there are a lot of people who will not get their medical card in Missouri because they think that they're going to get their guns taken away from them. And I think we will just see, I know, and I don't, you know, you can't give them any sort of false hope, right? So I feel like once rec is here, the good news is, Zach, that, you know, we don't have to segregate medical from rec in the event that, you know, we get the right bill passed. It really is going to be a tax differential. So I'm hopeful that we will continue to see the medical program build because that tax benefit's helpful. But also the people who are worried about their guns are going to buy because they don't have to, you know, declare any of this for a card.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, I think that, you know, whenever you have a program like this that's just standing up, everybody's watching and they want to make sure that the program is implemented successfully, compliantly, safely, and that folks, especially in the communities, when these facilities site in their communities, that they're able to be, you know, good neighbors and good business operators in those communities. And I think, you know, now that we're a year in, we're seeing that. So, you know, the sky hasn't fallen. The program has been really successful, both from a business perspective, but also from a patient access perspective. And so you know, when it makes sense, and if these ballot initiatives are able to make it on, I think that, you know, both Missouri patients, Missouri consumers, and Missouri business owners would be very embracing because they've proven that they're capable of doing this appropriately.
All right, so we are at time. Thank you guys so much. A couple of quick high-level hits just to remind everyone. September 2021 sales in Missouri, as Kelly mentioned, were about 25 million. It took Maryland 2 years to hit that monthly sales threshold in our tracking. So I just want to call that out as we constantly get asked, what are comparable surrogate proxy markets? And we're assessing and fighting internally. Is it Illinois because it borders? Is it Maryland as a medical market? Is it Arizona? Where is it? Michigan? Where are we looking? I just want to call out the power and the strength of Missouri market already. Also, there's nothing more exciting for a bunch of data nerds than to see different dynamics happening at play in different markets. So as I mentioned before, thus far, Missouri has the largest % dollar sales coming from edibles than we've seen in any other market. And I'll tell you, historically, it took some time to hit those thresholds. So seeing a newer legal medical market, seeing that level of sales going through edibles is pretty exciting. So as we go to releasing top brands by category later this month, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things. And then the last point, which we all talked about here, but new brands, new products, new form factors that haven't existed in other markets. Really exciting to look at a new, relatively new medical market, obviously a new medical market for BDSA to tracking that does have both some MSO large brand play, but a lot of things coming from within the state. So excited to continue to track the market. Thank you guys all so much for joining us today. Obviously for the audience, if you have any questions, reach out to us directly. But more to come from us in the next 3 weeks. We got a blog post specifically about Missouri. We've got a few other insights, content pieces coming. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for being great partners and clients. And if there are any questions out there for myself or the panelists, let us know. info@bdsa.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
everybody.
Jessica.